You had a man crush. I had a different kind back in the 1980s. I think we can go ahead. There I am with Brooke Shields. This was before I got married, and this is not one of the chapters in your book.
You know, I had to leave it out. It was too sordid.
What?
What would the chapter be called?
Hard.
It was the 80s.
It's a time we don't want to talk about in front of people.
But if the chapter had a title, what would it be?
I'm leaving you.
Brooke and the Schnook.
No, should we tell them? Should we tell them? That's what I'm saying there.
Yeah.
And then you could write in as to what you think.
I'm thinking you're saying I'd rather talk to anyone but him. That's what I'm saying.
I'm actually looking at Beckham.
That's right. She was actually. You were actually in town when I was working at NBC for some event. I want to say at the Kennedy Center, and you were nice enough to take part in my story.
Oh, well, you were a gentleman then, so
you have no memory of it, and I think that's great.
You have a big heart.
But you've been swinging down memory lane because you've written a real tell-all. It's called "There Was a Little Girl: The Real Story of My Mother and Me." Famously, for people who were alive back in those days, who watched you grow up, and you
take out my teeth and finish the
No, I'm just saying, you know, Elisabeth was much younger. She didn't live through the 80s like we lived through the 80s.
Distance ourselves from that question.
But the story back then was your mother, Terry, was a real stage mom, and she really drove you hard.
Well, you know, that was one of the perspectives. I mean, it was a really interesting thing because in the book I talk about how she was sort of the counterintuitive stage mom because she wanted to sort of thwart the system. I mean, she would take me to go-sees, which you try to get a job. And
go see a director or producer or something.
You know, get a modeling job or something. And we'd hear these mothers get on the elevator and say, like, what'd they say? And then you'd hear a kid cry. And she'd be like, you know what, she's the opposite of that. And so it was this really weird thing she became, but she was never Mama Rose. She wasn't secure enough to want the spotlight for herself, but she had this little prize baby that then became
the golden goose
focused on and photographed.
What was the most difficult part of the book to write for you?
I actually think the difficult part was writing about all the happy times because there were so many that nobody ever wanted to focus on. It's not sexy. It's not appealing to people. But there was so much laughter and so much support. And then you realize, oh, I know what the ending of the story is. And it didn't end the way you read that and you think, oh, this could end up really well. And then it doesn't.
The first part I opened to was the Blue Lagoon part because you write explicitly on that. And you also refer right away to your mom's drinking. And that played a major role in it, didn't it? And it
that was sort of the third character in our sort of little, you know, trifecta. We had Mom, me, and then we had alcohol. And as a young child, you learn to navigate an alcoholic. You learn to navigate an addict. And you become this person who's sort of hypervigilant. And that became such an important part of our life. I mean, I was 13 when I staged our first intervention. You really only get one good intervention.
And how does it affect you now as a mom?
Well, as a mom, I'm regarding alcohol, I'm much more hypersensitive. You know, I'm afraid. I know it's in my genes, so I'm real sort of type A about it, which who knows what that means. But I also am more communicative with my kids in a way that my mom was sort of too. Mom never did the work on herself. She was never willing to be vulnerable. She was just too scared.
And then you write in the end, the tragic way it ended, you almost wish you go back to the drinking days because your mom was getting dementia, a form of Alzheimer's, and you almost couldn't get her back.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest sort of tragedy for me is that you, as dealing with the alcoholism, you sort of finally get to this point where it's not as important anymore. And you think, okay, now she's going to be the little grandmother or she's going to have some fabulous shop in the West Village and with her fabulous friends. And then you look at this woman who's just been diminished. And I would have never thought it was dementia that would have taken her. I would have thought her liver would have given up. And so it kind of crushes you again because your hope is different. But the story itself, there's a lot of levity in it as well as sort of grave moments. But I think it's anybody who has a interesting and layered relationship with their mother. And I really don't know anybody who doesn't.
Explain to us how your relationship with Andre Agassi wound up. Essentially, you were divorced from your mom because of it.
Well, he was the first person that gave me the strength to be able to individuate from my mother, but in a loving way. You know, every other relationship, people were saying, you know, you choose me. choose me or her, because she was my main relationship, and I was very ensconced, enmeshed with her. And he said, it doesn't have to be, you need to be your independent self, but she's still your mom. And I appreciated that.
Because he had very aggressive parents,
he honored her and respected her.
Right. And just real quick, do you any regrets about growing up famous? Because on the outside, people want to grow up famous, but you also talk about the struggles of trying to be a normal kid, to go to high school and to go to college at the same time.
The weird thing in my situation was I was interestingly buffered by my career and by my fame, and it kept me kind of more on a straight and narrow path. High school's hard, no matter who you are, and kids are mean and kids are tough, and being famous to me actually kind of gave me this little safety net, shield to be hiding behind, which is weird. But that's how it worked.
Was it more scary that other people were going to read what you were going to write, or that your own children were going to read what you were going to write?
I hope they read it one day. They're not interested. They just don't care. I mean, they really just don't care. They're like, why would I want to read? I don't want to read my homework books. Why would I want to read this? Eventually they will, and I hope what they get out of it is, people say, how did you not turn into a train wreck? And through all of it, there was never lack of love. Like, I just knew I was loved, and that gave me such a fortified feeling. And I think that's what I hope they see, is that moms are trying.
Yeah.
That shines through in your book. The book is called There Was a Little Girl, The Real Story of My Mother and Me. Brooke Shields, thank you very much. I'll see you in another 30 years.
Not another 30 years. He's being generous.
You need to recreate that photo. Thank you. Love you.
Right. Nice to see you.